Welcome back. This is episode 3 of going over the leather fire helmet, specifically the N5A. Last time we spoke, we had covered the 1985 New Yorker, first generation with the impact cap, N5A. And today we're going to cover 1986 till about mid-1992, summer of 92. So just a quick recap of what we covered. This is the original N5A, 1985. 5A crown. The biggest selling point of the N5A in 85 was that they had beefed up ridges and combs, they had an impact cap installed, and they offered you more protection and met the OSHA standards and regulations at the time. Also the same year that the N6A Houston came out, but that's a separate video in itself. So it looked very similar to a 5A, just a little more beefed up, good lines, slightly bigger dome to accommodate the impact cap. Overall, a good-looking helmet that just didn't fit that well. Liner carried over from the 5A, very thick foam in here to give you the suction fit. Thin liners with no binding on the edge, just stitched together, cleaned up. These flaps did not drop straight down. They actually had a curve in them. It's kind of hard to show you. One hand here. There's a curve. And the suspension straps, they do not go very far into the helmet, which guys moving from a 5A to an N5A, you would expect a similar fit with just a little more weight, but these originals actually sat higher on your head. So that is the original from 85. Moving into 1986, the biggest changes right off the bat. Look at the rivet right here. It's on the right side of the comb. And look at the rivet here. It's on the left side of the comb. So this rivet here goes all the way through the helmet. Goes all the way through. Goes through the suspension D-ring and gets riveted through right there. So your suspension is holding in the impact cap to the helmet as well. That rivet there is holding right there. So 1, and then 2, and then 3 and 4 on the other side. Whereas on this helmet, it's on this side of the comb. Your suspension D-ring is still located here on its own separate rivet. But this rivet goes all the way through and secures the band and the impact cap to the leather shell. Now, let's follow it. Right there. Turn the whole thing over. There's the rivet. And there is your suspension rivet. So they decided to, I don't know if it's beefing up the design or taking some of the stress off the impact cap and suspension or the leather shell itself, but that was one of the more obvious changes that they made. Also, you can see the ratchet clip here. These didn't come about until, of course, they're broken. These did not come about until, I want to say 89 or 90. The ratchets, they were carryover from the plastic helmets. They may actually have been designed for the 880 originally, and then they decided to shoehorn them into the leather helmets. But 86 till about 88, there were pretty much no ratchets. They didn't come about till maybe 89 to 90. Then you can order the helmet with a ratchet or without a ratchet, but they would install the clips regardless. So here's the gap with the 2 different rivets. So structurally, that was one change. Another change was the crown. We saw the discontinuation of the 5A crown from 85. Moving into 1986, they were using this crown. This crown lasted a couple of years. It's oversized, it's overbuilt, it's much thicker brass than what you see now. I'll show you how you take a modern crown and you can manipulate it very easily. Actually, just fold it right in half. It doesn't take much. Right? I take this one, and I'm squeezing it with even more pressure, and it's not even moving. beefed up crown. Much harder to work with, much harder to fit to the helmet when you're installing hand-fitted retro brass. So I can see why they discontinued using this after a couple of years as well. And a lot of them were oversized. I've seen them where they end up cutting some material off on the right side and the left side to make them fit. Which, let's take away one more step and just go with an easier crown to work with. So these lasted up until about 1988, give or take. Then they went to this style crown. Similar to what you see nowadays, except these had more defined spleens on it. Sharp lines. Thinner brass. I don't know if it's by design, but they had reliefs here and here, plus on the other side. It may have just been a way that the brass split naturally when they formed these. But when you fit them over your front holder, it didn't give you much of a gap. It was actually a very tight fit because they had the reliefs in here. So this lasted until about the late 90s, and they switched over to this. It's pretty much the same thing, except the lines just aren't as defined. That's all. But getting back to the 80s, they had the reflector trim low. If you asked for it, it'd be low on the dome, as we went over in the last video. And then they switched over to this style reflect sight. This came out about 1986 and was used till about 1995. Here's a few that I salvaged. And we did bring these back, by the way. We called them the Retro Tech. So these came about, and then they would place them on the dome higher up. A lot of the times you would see the stud as your guide. I mean, this one is a little higher, but I'll show you a different helmet. A lot of times they would line up the stud with the bottom of your tet and then just go all the way around. And there's the more modern crown. The helmets also retained the tan impact cap. These tan caps lasted till about 1992. I want to say they changed around May or June of 92, depending on what they had in stock. Chin straps relatively remained the same. Nomex material. And then the domes as well. 85, we saw a pretty decent cut dome. But again, the selling point was the fact that you get beefed up combs and ridges, so they decided, again, it's circumstantial to whoever was cutting the dome for the day, but for 86, a lot of 86, even 87 helmets, you'll see them where they were overbuilt beyond more than what you need. This has a nice curve. This one has a nice curve. 86 to 87, you'll see helmets where they basically come all the way out and then curve down. And the helmet looks like a royal butter crown. So, very ugly looking. And then, as we mentioned, the ear flaps, thin ear flaps, very, very thick foam rubber, just like the 5As had. So let's go over another helmet that has ear flaps from the late 80s into the 90s. So, they discontinued the use of the 5A ear flaps, and they started making these. They made these standard for a long time. 6-inch long, yellow ear flaps, retain the same red flannel interior. But here's the binding. They took an extra piece of the Nomex material and they made an edge binding out of it. And it just followed all the way through. All the way to the other side. You can see on this one, there's no edge binding. It's just the two sets of material carefully folded together and stitched together. You can see the coverage too of the ear flaps. There's a gap between the leather forehead pad and where the ear flaps start. And then if you look at over to this one, they put increased coverage. The flap starts into the leather. And also the foam on the inside went to about half the thickness of what is in here. You see a lot of 5As where this stuff still lasts. Some helmets could be almost 80 years old, and that foam is still in there intact. Took a lot to deteriorate it because it was so beefy. And they went to liners that had material that was only half the thickness. So that foam was very flimsy. It's actually the same thickness as you would see on a liner nowadays. Very thin. It's like here. There's your foam, neoprene rubber, open cell. A lot of give, real flimsy. 1 year of using these, if you don't maintain your liner and clean them out, wash them every now and then, these rot apart. You get the green cheese, just like this stuff here. Compared to what they used to have. Look how thick that one is. Much thicker. Much more beefier material. It just held up a lot better. So they switched over to a new style liner. Retained the same impact cap. The color of the impact cap got a little lighter. It's tough to tell. That's a fairly light tan. And those original 85 New Yorkers had a very, I wouldn't say very dark, but a darker tan. There's definitely a difference, if I would tell. And then the introduction of the ratchet as well. This liner has the slots for the ratchet. They introduced that with the introduction of the later liners they came out with. You could still get a helmet on request from the factory, though, without the ratchet. So there would be no ratchet slot in here, which I'll cover in the next video, which covers 92 to 97. This has a ratchet slot. If you ordered a helmet that had no ratchet in it, you would still get the clips, which are right there. They're actually intact, believe it or not. That black clip is your attachment for the ratchet. You would get the clip, but there wouldn't be a ratchet slot on your liner. There would just be nothing there. Get a lot of praise for the older helmets. They were better, they were this, they were that. 90 to 92 is when you see the short brims, and there were a lot of inconsistencies. They looked great, I'll give them that. They had the retro brass. The leather was actually superior to what they're using nowadays, I'll give them that. But there was a lot of inconsistencies of where the trim was put. It's supposed to be a little lower than that. And then look at the front studs. One's further to the right than the other. And then the short brim. This is a medium with a very short brim, which I'll cover in a separate video as well. I'll explain why we get short brims. But this was basically what you were getting from 86 to 92. And then in 92, around June, I believe, they switched the color of the impact cap. They went to black. So, fairly consistent for a while. Remember, 86 to 87, you had a very large dome, and you had the other crown right here. And then from then on until about 92, it was basically this. So the next one we cover will be 92 and up. They switched tets again. They switched chin straps. Slightly longer brim. And then we'll just keep moving on. 98, 2000, then the buyout, then into the later 2000s, and so on and so forth. But hope this was informational for you guys, and I'll catch you next time.